Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. So, here's one thing that I want to prerequisite people to let them know about this movie. One, I had watched this via a foreign means, so when it came down to the subtitle parts, there wasn't English in the subtitle parts. So I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Maybe I can make the consensus of what's going on because I wasn't sure. Because there was no English subtitles where this movie was to play out. Wherever it was, because I watched the bootleg version of it because I wasn't going to go into theaters to watch this movie. It just wasn't going to happen. Because I was like, is this movie really gonna be that good? And so, like, 40%, if not, like, there can be bargaining for 30, maybe 50, somewhere ballparking in there. So 50 to 30% of this movie is to probably be in another language. So even in action sequences where there's fighting going on, you have to read subtitles. That is my biggest gripe in the entire way a movie is to be done. I do not want to read subtitles during fight sequences. That is the dumbest thing to ever put on in a movie. So you have to watch a movie multiple times. The one time to watch, yeah, now I got the subtitle part, but now I need to go and watch the fighting sequence because I need to go rewatch this again just to get what's going on in the fighting sequence. I'm like, that movie for doing this? Like, no, like, you should have obviously figured out that any fighting sequence should have been in English, but I guess that's just me, right? Anyways, or I would I guess, just have to learn Chinese. I guess I would just learn Chinese for this movie specifically. Oh, all right, cool. I'll do it. I'll figure it out. No offense to anybody that speaks Chinese and whatever. I'm just talking about this film. I'm just being honest about it, and hopefully no one dislikes this because I'm just being honest. Uh, Going to this movie, I would say that this probably has to be freaking hands down the worst MCU movie that I've seen in quite a while, and that's talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp. That's talking about Captain Marvel, which I didn't really like. And so now this has to be heads over heels the worst Marvel movie. And that has nothing to do with there being subtitles throughout it. It just has everything to do with this movie. Like, I didn't care about Shang-Chi. I cared more probably about his sidekick, who is to be Katie. I liked her more than I did Shang-Chi. And pretty much every single, like, Easter egg that they were to tell you, I'll talk about two things that people have probably heard about. So Trevor Slattery, the Mandarin, was supposed to be in this film, and I can say, yes, he is in this film, but he is an irrelevant character. The Abomination is in the trailer of this film, so I can feel like I can say that. And this character was, again, to be a wasteful character that doesn't have any real skin in the game. He's just there to be there for a few seemingly minutes, and then he is to be gone. But there is another MCU character that is to just be here because of obvious reasons. And when eventually I was to watch this character, I'm just like, whatever. So, honestly, this movie doesn't feel like a movie that I needed to see. Like, it kind of felt like, man, if they could just fuse this character in into some S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of thing, or just make him just appear in some movie like a Civil War or something like that. Like, have him be built up like a Black Panther beforehand, then I would have been much more intrigued about this origin story. But I wasn't. They should have put him somewhere in some of these movies to build up the interest of this character, because when I was watching this movie, like really towards the big battle scenes towards the end of the movie, I just kept saying in my head the words Shang-Chi. Like, I just kept saying Shang-Chi! Like, I just kept doing that for all the battle scenes. Just because, like, I was so, like, I am so disinterested in this movie. And we're in battle scenes where there's a lot of action going on, and I just, in my head, kept rattling around of like, I don't care about any of these battle scenes. I'm just going to continue to yell out into my brain, Shang-Chi, repetitiously during the whole battle scenes, just because, like, I have nothing to be interested in. And I feel like this is just a big battle just to have a big battle because they need a big climax at the end of this film. And really, there were so many parts about this movie that I actually did not understand. I didn't understand this movie, and I don't think a rewatch, or I don't think a freaking like me going and seeing a subtitled version of this movie would probably help, because it just feels like they didn't really bother to really explain things. It really doesn't feel like we have a real good, solid origin story of Shang-Chi in this movie. Like, this character's story was not good enough for me. I'm like, dude, this feels like Ninja Assassin. Like, this is basically like a Ninja Assassin kind of movie where, like, really we're just left with Shang-Chi just being with his dad and having to just punch things for X amount. And I'm just like, I am so just disconnected from this movie because of how they made me not invest in this character. And I was just so disappointed. And there really wasn't even good visuals here. There wasn't even cool visuals to really just be like, oh, wow, this movie. And also, we have this kind of like Field of Dreams moment that kind of goes in this film, where we just have people driving through this like supposed like long stretch of like trees slash grass thing. And I'm just like, what is this movie? What is this film? Please help me someone understand. I don't understand this stuff. We have like a Falcor thing going on in this movie also. We have a never-ending story thing going towards the end of this movie. And I'm like, and once all of a sudden I saw this like Falcor like creature in this film, I'm like, turn around. I just started like singing like the never-ending story kind of thing going on in this movie. Never ending story. I was freaking like, man, I should probably go and watch Stranger Things. Uh, yeah. This movie is so goofy. I don't understand it, and I have no interest in wanting to watch it again to try and understand it. Like, it's just so. It gets to the point where I'm like, really? They have these things in this movie, and then they have to, like, go back and explain what things were? And because no one can understand a lick of anything that's going on here. How is it all of a sudden we got this far in this movie? Oh my god, this movie. This movie was like a whole, like, I need another movie to explain what happened in this movie. Like, I need a behind the scenes thing for them to break down every. I need to watch this movie on commentary. I guess from probably a Blu-ray and DVD thing, to have them break down every single scene to me, because I'm like, I don't understand what's going on here. Um, I don't get it. So hopefully someone else does, because he could explain the whole movie. Just explain every single second of the movie to me, and I'm like, okay, I still hate this film, because I'll still do that. I'm like, yeah, I still hate this film because this film is so goofy and just so like blah to me. It's blah. It's a boatload of blah. So let's go into it. Let's go into that double five time territory because it's about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we can do spoil this movie. If I say the word Shang-Chi or Chang-Chi, I apologize because the pronouncing of it, I guess, is Shang-Chi. More than likely, I might just get tired of having to say Shang-Chi every time, and some Shang-Chi might get in there. It's bound to happen. So let's break down the goofy beginning and everywhere of this movie. So the very beginning of this movie is to be about like 10 minutes just seemingly filled with subtitles. And I'm just like, great. Like even the narrator is to narrate seemingly in Chinese. So I'm just like, is that just a part of this movie that I saw somewhere? Or is stuff actually in English, but it's not in English in this movie? Because I had to like fast forward to just think like, is this the English version of this movie? And it was, and I was just like, okay, so why is it all? Why is it in the very first 10 minutes? I'm getting. Anyways, so we have the supposed villain in this movie who is the Exu Wenwu. Wenwu? Exu Wenwu. Alright. So we find out Wenwu is to. Or Weiwu. I'm going to say Wenwu because I don't know names. I never know names in movies. So that are. Like, names are always going to be inaccurate sounding because it's bound to happen. So Wenwu is to have already had the 10 rings and he's to have this long hair. And he is to have built, or he is to go and take this compound and sit on his throne and have a lot of people underneath him, like Death Dealers and Razor Fist, which Razor Fist is probably the best thing about this movie. A guy who has one hand that turns into a machete is probably got to be the best thing of this film. That's the only thing that I actually liked about this film, because everything else was garbage to me. But at least we had like a Razor Fist, because he reminded me of like Taser Face, Razor Fist. So that was a good part of this movie to me. So Wenwu eventually is to go on and is to be able to make it through this forest that is to eventually have Shang-Chi's mother. And so Shang-Chi's mother, who is Li, is to eventually fight Wenwu. And so it seems that when Wenwu was to fight Li, it seems that she was able to beat him. And then Wenwu was to be pushed out of the forest of which Li was in. And so Wenwu had to like kind of wait for the next time for this thing to open to eventually get to Li. So it seems when that was to happen, eventually Wenwu was to eventually try to woo over Li to eventually have them have children. And so Li, I guess, who was to be like the defender of wherever like bizarrish foresty place that she was to be in, I guess when she was to leave there, eventually there were to be people that were upset that she had left, and so they basically dragged her back to where she had come from, and then like locked her behind some bizarrish gate of sorts, which is supposedly say that she was to die, but like there isn't seemingly a consensus. It seems like locking behind this gate is to unlock uh like seemingly death itself, or these things called soul suckers. Soul suckers. And we also had this thing called the Mega Soul Sucker. Wow, names, right? Just wait till the dragon that is to come out. It needs to be called the Great Protector. Man, these names. The dragon to me looked like Falcor from Neverending Story. It did, without the. Anyways, pushing on. So, so eventually we have Shang-Chi, who is to be a valet, who is to work side by side with a girl named Katie, who is to have a Ferrari show up for them to valet. So Katie is to go off and take the car, and Shang-Chi is like, hey man, you're gonna treat this like normal, right? You're gonna, like, you're not gonna go and like really just wreck this guy's car, right? So Katie goes on and drives wildly, and Shang-Chi's like holding onto the car. He's like, I'm so scared. Like, this is scary. So uh so now these characters are to be like Shang-Chi and Katie are to be valets, and so eventually once they are to go home for the day, we eventually have Katie's mother that's like, man, I didn't come all the way here just to have my Katie just be a valet. Like, I want her to have like more than that. And they're also trying to say that like, hey, you should get a real job. And Katie and Shang-Chi are just kind of telling like, are just kind of saying like, hey, like what we're doing is a real job. Like, valet is a real tough job. It's really difficult. Yes, it is. So Shang-Chi is to eventually get this postcard that is to have this dragon drawing on it, and is to have this certain address. And I don't think they ever really clear up where this postcard comes from, or maybe that's in some part of the movie that's subtitled and I didn't understand. Uh, so eventually, Shang-Chi is to now have to uh, go on a bus to get prepared for another workday. And so, coincidentally, now here's where we have Razor Fist, who is going to be coincidentally be on this bus to say, hey, Shang-Chi, I want your medallion upon your neck. So now Shang-Chi is to have to fight these guys in this bus. He couldn't have like kicked them out or whatever. And so all of a sudden, coinkadinkly, we eventually have it where the bus driver, or no wait, we have it where the brakes in the bus are to brake, and so this bus driver is trying to control this bus. Eventually, also the bus driver ends up getting like chucked out of this bus, to where Shang-Chi now has to control the bus, but then it transitions to Katie controlling this bus, so it's kind of like a Sandra Bullock, Keanu Reeves speed movie now. So Shang-Chi is to tell Katie that when I do the signal, you go and you make a hard right turn. Because eventually, like, half of the bus is starting to tear apart. So we have Shang-Chi telling all the passengers to go to the front of the bus, and there's to be this guy named Kevin or whatever, going and videotaping this whole fight scene. So Shang-Chi is not doing any fight maneuvers that feel unique whatsoever, or it feels like all of a sudden we have Shang-Chi who has released this power that we have never seen before in our lives. Because again, Wen Wu is to have the 10 rings, and Wen Wu is to use like the power of the 10 rings to do all kinds of stuff. Like he is to like kind of like jetpack off, to have him gonna like jump really high, or be able to like hit people with the 10 rings. And Lee was to eventually counter Wenwu by using the rings against him to kind of take him down. And so, but yeah, so Shang-Chi is to go and fight all of these guys, these death dealers and Razor Fist, and get them all to one side of the bus. And then he ends up pulling the emergency brake for Katie to see. And then all of a sudden, Katie is to do this right turn. And so that is to have Shang-Chi be able to separate the back half of this bus with the top half of this bus. And then all of a sudden, Katie is still needing to figure out how to slow this bus down. She ends up kind of crashing into certain things to try and slow this down, but it really doesn't all work out. So eventually, Katie is to kind of latch herself onto this garbage truck, and that's how she can slow this bus down to a stop. And then Katie looks at the garbage truck driver like, hey, thanks for the help. Like, thanks for the team up there. So now Shang-Chi is to need to forcibly leave to go back to China. And so Katie is just like, well, you're going to have to explain all this to me. You're going to have to explain, like, how is it all of a sudden that you could fight the way you can? Like, you need to explain everything to me, and explain it on the plane because I'm going with you. So, because Shang-Chi is to have been a guy named Sean, and so Sean and Katie from time to time are to eventually go and double date with, or seemingly double date with these two people, that they're explaining their lives and how they seem to be very uneventful. And so, like, obviously this kind of couple has to kind of mention, it's like, well, your lives are kind of not all that exciting. So eventually towards the end of the movie they come back to this, and then they mention about the mega soul suckers and all of this stuff, and about them having to shoot off arrows and all this stuff. And then the people are to mention, it's like, are you just saying all this just because I, like, you told us before that you're, like, I complained before that your lives weren't really eventful, and so now you're making up stories to justify all this? But then all of a sudden, Wu is to come into frame, and then eventually tell him, like, hey, like, you're Shang-Chi, right? You had the 10 rings, right? Like, let's come on, like, end credit scene, buddy. So Shang-Chi is to be on the plane, and because Shang-Chi is to give Katie the postcard that shows that he has to leave, that he has to go, because he feels that his sister is in danger. So Shang-Chi is to go on the plane and explain his life story to Katie, because I think this is probably a 16-hour flight, or probably more. Kind of like I just watched The Wolverine, and it was like a 16-hour flight. So Shang-Chi is to mention that, like he ended up wanting to just call himself Sean, and Katie makes fun of that. It's like, so, like, you just shortened your name. You just really just shorten your name. Like it's like if someone were to like completely want to change their life and instead of calling their name like Gina, they change their name to Gina, and like that is such a stupid thing, and it is. So Shang-Chi is to mention that what had happened is that Shang-Chi was to supposedly do some thing that his father ordered him to do, but he didn't want to do it, so he ran away to America. Kind of like Coming to America, where Eddie Murphy didn't want to get married to some woman, and so he basically ran off to America to sow his wild oats to just say, like, hey, I'm probably going to try and find a bride while I'm here. So, Shang-Chi is to of supposedly after his mother died, because before his mother died, it seemed that Shang-Chi was getting training from both his father and his mother, and until there were to be guys, there was a bunch of guys to go and grab Lee and take her away, which that's just kind of how like towards the back half of this plays off. So Wenwu is to like have Shang-Chi just train crazily, train to where he's like punching his hand to this fist, or punching his hand into his that just he's punching this wood piece and he's punching it over and over again and bruising up his fists with blood. And so Wenwu goes and like bandages like Shang-Chi's like wrist to just kind of tell him it's like there's a whole reason why I'm doing this. I'm trying to make you strong. Like I'm trying to make you to where eventually when I need you to do something, you're going to be able to do it. You're going to be strong enough. So Shang-Chi is to go with this, I believe, death dealer to eventually go on this mission. And the death dealer is to take everyone out. And supposedly Shang-Chi was supposed to kill someone, and he actually did go through with it, but then afterwards he felt so bad about it that he wanted to run to America to like feel like he can be a different person, and so he didn't have to be that guy anymore that had to kill people for his dad. So in some way, I think I covered most of that. So Sean was to talk uh, to his sister, and this is also in flashback form, where Kasi Ling or like Z Ling, I believe, is his sister, and so they have this dialogue talking back and forth, and I don't know what it is because it was all in Chinese, and so it was like great, like another thing of dialogue that I don't know what's going on because they can't do this movie in English, and because it has to be in China, so it's Chinese, so whatever. It's like, hey, buddy, just learn the language. Just wait till the movie comes out in Disney Plus, because who cares about going to it in theaters now? So Shang-Chi talks about the dialogue, the last dialogue that he ever had with his sister, and so eventually what was to happen with his sister, which we'll find out, because when Shang-Chi is to go to the place of which that ceiling is to have put together, Sealing has put together some like uh like fighting uh like area where everybody, like, we just see a bunch of these small rooms, or these like certain sections where everybody's to be fighting it out, and people are betting on things. And so basically this girl is to put together this like this fighting building. So eventually we are to see here like this one guy who's be their guide like through this place, kind of showcasing what's going on. And all of a sudden Katie is to speak English, and so this guy's like, oh yeah, I know my ABCs, like, good, like like I guess like both of you don't speak Chinese. So eventually we end up finding Wong fighting Abomination. And so Abomination is trying to like strike Wong, but Wong is to use his magical powers to have Abomination punch himself. And so eventually Wong and Abomination seem to be good friends, weirdly, even though Abomination is technically a villain in this movie. They realize that Abomination is a villain. Like, what are they doing with Abomination in this movie? It's so freaking weird that all of a sudden Wong and Abomination are just good friends. Like, how are they gonna play that out in the next like thing? Like, are they gonna have Abomination as the next like Hulk? I am just so like baffled about this movie. Like, I'm just like, what the is going on? Like, is Abomination going to be like put into She-Hulk? Is that what's gonna go on there? Like, is She-Hulk gonna be the next Hulk, where she's gonna like put together a bunch of like Hulk people? I don't know. So Wong is just to go off with Abomination, and like I guess they're gonna go and share milkshakes or something together. Oh, there is to also be a spot in the early stages of this movie where Shang-Chi and Katie were to go and sing karaoke to have a good time. And eventually they replay that later on when Wong and Shang-Chi and Katie are going and having a karaoke session in the towards the end credit scenes. So I would have assessed or assumed that Shang-Chi would have been fighting Abomination, and that would have been cool to see, like, all the skills that Shang-Chi was to compile together to have this unique fight against Abomination. That would have been pretty sweet. But instead, Shang-Chi is to go out shirtless, and he is to fight the most menacing person of all, and that is to be his own sister, that doesn't have magical powers either. And it's just human versus human fighting it out on the grandest stage of them all. Just like, really? So we don't even showcase the full-fledged ability of Shang-Chi to have us justify this guy could take out an Abomination-like character or a Wong-like character. That would have been interesting, but instead we don't get to see this guy's skills whatsoever displayed throughout this entire film, besides a normal kind of kick and punch and all this crap, where I'm just like, I don't see the skill set of this character whatsoever. I don't understand the skill set of this character that makes me feel like he is better than anybody else that has ever kicked or punched anybody in my life. So, we have this fight out between brother and sister, and so Shang-Chi is trying to reason with his sister, and eventually Shang-Chi just gets freaking knocked out, and of course Shang-Chi is to lose because he doesn't really want to fight against his sister anyways. So we end up finding out that Katie had put a ton of money against Shang-Chi because she's like, yeah, I knew you were going to freaking lose. And Shang-Chi is to ask Katie, did you seriously bet against me? And Katie's like, maybe. like, so, so Shang-Chi is to talk with his sister, and so his sister had mentioned that uh, and Ceiling was to kind of wait like a very long time, like uh, a day became a week, became a month, became 6 years, just kind of waiting for I believe her brother to come back, and he never did because Ceiling was waiting at the throne or the shrine of her mother for eventually someone to come get her, either her father or her brother, and like it was just like a 6 year ordeal, and so Ceiling just decides um, to just go in and just be like, you know what, I'm going to create my own business. Like, I'm going to create my own thing. Like, I'm not going to wait on my father or, like, anybody to, like, help me or tell me what to do. Like, I am just going to go and do my own thing. And so that's when she, like, created this fight club or this fight syndicate. So we get that out. And so we eventually just push on to have the Death Dealers go and try and fight out Shang-Chi and his sister because Razor Fist was to eventually go to try to get the other medallion from Si Ling Z's neck, because eventually Shang-Chi is to mention that, hey, they tried to take my medallion. They're probably after yours now. So they of course accomplish their goal, but the whole real thing is to get all of this family back to China, because Wenwu is to appear after like Shang-Chi and Ling and Katie were to all try to like scathe down this bamboo, and Katie was to almost fall several times, and plus also this bamboo at one point was almost to be about to break, and they were trying to like scale down this building while trying to fight these weird looking like ninja guys that have these like candy canes that are to be these like taser things, and I'm like, taser face. So like we had this moment where Katie like drops really far, but Ceiling luckily catches her, and like Ceiling is on this one thing of bamboo that's all of a sudden to bend really far. She's like, whoa, and then it like freaking breaks. She's like, whoa, and I'm like, whoa, and all of a sudden Keanu Reeves comes into the scene. He's like, whoa, and oh yeah. So Wenwu is to eventually just like be like, hey, the family's back together. It's been years. Because Wenwu also went off to try to figure out how he can rescue um, his wife from being behind this gate of this secret place that his mother was in originally, where Wenwu was trying to fight her, and then eventually had like the trees all come in on him, to where he's like, like you're gonna lock me out of this? Really? Come on now. So weirdly enough, so all these guys fly into where supposedly Wenwu's compound is, because he has some compound. And so we have a reference of Wenwu saying, like, hey, it seemed that uh, some American had tried to steal my name and tried to come off that he was actually that he was the leader of the Ten Rings. But he ended up being called the Mandarin, which is just some chicken. I'm like, what the is that? The chicken. So there's a reference of Iron Man 3 in this movie, and then eventually we get Trevor Slattery in this movie, because eventually what ends up happening is let's kind of clean this all up. So they're having dinner. Uh, there's a reference of Iron Man 3, and that, like, Wenwu's just like, that's a joke. Like, that wasn't a real legitimate freaking that was just some chicken. You know what I'm saying? So Wenwu is to get the medallions and to bizarrely put them into this dragon's eyes. And so all of a sudden, this dragon is to spew out this water that is to all of a sudden create this bizarrish map to have you figure out the maze of getting to where supposedly Lee is, or supposedly where Lee's people are, and where Lee is to be held, supposedly. So we really end up finding out that Wenwu is to supposedly gone crazy, that there are to be things whispering him sweet nothings to tell him that Lee has been trying to contact him, which isn't true, and it's just a way for Wenwu to try to unlock all these soul suckers rather than his wife. So and Wenwu is to eventually like put all this like information together and like tell his family what all he has found, and it's like, well, that's great and all, but like, you're insane. So while Katie and Shang-Chi and Sealing were eventually trying to get out of this complex, because eventually they were going to try to get where uh, Lee is supposed to be at before Wenwu is. So eventually, so Shang-Chi is going to supposedly find this character called Ying Nang or Ying Nang, Nan, that is eventually in this maze of forest of whichever, to eventually be able to tell them that Wenwu is coming with all of his people, with his death dealers, or his death dealer and his razor fist, and like, they're gonna try to um, open the gate and release all these probably soul suckers. So while they're eventually trying to head out of this compound, they accidentally stumble upon Trevor Slattery. And so now Trevor Slattery has to mention like who he is, basically mentioning what had happened in Iron Man 3, and then eventually like what has led from Iron Man 3 to this point, because some people probably didn't see that one little like snidbit of Trevor Slattery being in prison, and then eventually the real leader of the Ten Rings broke him out. So Trevor Slattery is with this faceless creature that is to be called Morris. Get your plushies out now, folks. Like, Get your Pokemons out now for Morris, the faceless winged creature thing that is to basically probably be the next Pikachu of this thing. And I'm just like, good God. Like, I like figured that they were gonna try to find something to try to merchandise, and this thing probably has to be it. This Morris thing that can make it look like a Digimon or a Pokemon thing that looks like freaking Bulbasaur from Pokemon or something. It looks weird. So, but this thing has no face. It just has like a chest for a face. So weird. So Trevor is explaining all this, and Morris is to be the person who is to be able to help these people easily be able to get into this secret forest to eventually get to where they need to go. So we have Wen Wu, who through that watery dragon thing was to eventually know that 3 days from now that the forest will open up, he'll be able to get through it, and then he'll be able to get to where he needs to go uh, to ungate Ling, supposedly. So Shang-Chi is going to beat him there. And so we just have this spot uh, where Shang-Chi is stealing, of course, Razor Fist's car, and Razor Fist is like, hey, they stole my car. All of a sudden, they start driving with this car to all of a sudden need a fingerprint to keep this car going. And so all of a sudden, we have these death dealers, these ninja guys that are trying to fight Shang-Chi and everybody in this car. And so luckily, we have Shang-Chi who's to grab one of the ninjas to put the fingerprint on this. And so the car is to be working fine. So now they get to this like forest part where of course it was to be kind of like just kind of like pushed together. And so Morris is to now tell them when exactly that they can go and to start driving through the forest. So all of a sudden the thing is to open up, and Morris is to say like do it now. So to Trevor, because Trevor is like the communicator for Morris. It's so weird. So Katie is driving like crazy through this thing, and we're just kind of seeing her like zigzag all over the goddamn place because like this isn't the normal like thing. And we continue having like Trevor who's just like stay in the pocket, and Katie's like, I don't even know what that means, and he's like, stay in the pocket. So eventually this all finally heads to her like kind of just like almost running out of road, so to speak. And so they just drive and run through this one part of opening, and all of a sudden they end up finding this seemingly waterfall that they have to drive through. And then once they drive through that, all of a sudden they land upon seemingly a place where they can find Ying Nang or Ying Nang or Ying Nang. Anyways, so they go and they ask for this woman, and of course she ends up just plopping down. And like at first she ends up speaking Chinese, and then eventually like she goes to Katie, and then Katie speaks English. So then all of a sudden Ying Nang speaks English. So Ying is to say to both Shang-Chi and Xiling that their mother had left them clothes, which is to be the outfits that you're to see for Shang-Chi to wear. And that really this woman is to like be like the trainer of Lee. So we have Shang-Chi who is to try to learn from this woman, like how exactly did she beat Wen Wu? How did his mother beat Wen Wu? So Shang-Chi is trying to learn every bit of stuff from this woman to find this like kind of wind technique. Where I'm like, what is this, Pocahontas? No offense. But I'm just like, why are we having these like wind attacks? It seems really weird. So but Shang-Chi is to also remember some of the techniques that his mother had taught him, because we had the whole scene where Shang-Chi is to have been learning things from his mother, and like, so Shang-Chi was to be taught his mother's fighting style, but it's like really just him trying to remember how to do certain things, because Shang-Chi is still having an open fist, and this woman is trying to tell him, it's like, no, just open up your hand and try to like do it this way. So Shang-Chi is still getting the floor freaking mopped with this woman where he's just freaking taking her out. Let me pause here for a second. Let me do a reset. But eventually he is to learn the fighting style. So we end up also finding out that they are to be able to fuse some kind of dragon stuff with like certain kind of metals and stuff like that. So they end up making like dragon arrows, dragon swords, dragon whichever, dragon weapons. So eventually we have Katie who is to learn how to do a bow and arrow, and I guess she ends up being like the best out of everyone. So it seems like she ends up going with the lead guy who does bow and arrow, because eventually she's going to be part of this battle and she's going to be the bow and arrow girl. So I'm like, so in other words, she's going to be Hawkeye. Like, she's going to be the variation of Hawkeye in this movie, where eventually she's just going to be so good at this bow and arrow thing that eventually she'll become like a Hawkeye version of whatever, and she'll become better and better at this through time, right? So now we have to get to the big battle point, because really that's all that really matters. So Wenwu is to appear at this place and just be like, "Hey, like I want to go and unleash my wife. Like I've been waiting for her." And so this guy is just so stubborn to think that his wife is to still be alive. And Shang-Chi is to tell his father, it's like, dude, mom's dead. Like, just, like, get over it. She's dead. She's gone. And Wenwu was like, no. Like, I keep hearing her whisper sweet nothings to me. And it's like, no, she's dead. She's freaking dead, buddy. Like, just be fine with it. She's dead. So Wenwu is to appear, and now we have this battling it out between both like death dealers, razor fists, and Wenwu's and Shang-Chi's, and everybody's fighting it out. Oh, we also have Xiling, who is to eventually have this rope with the end of it being this dragon, like a dagger or blade. So she's like the kind of the ninja assassin part where you have this like roping thing where you have like this rope kind of like flinging at people with this blade at the end of it, which is kind of interesting. But anyways, I would have liked to there have been much more. Excuse me. Pardon my behavior. Excuse me. I would have liked there to be much more of a chain thing than just some rope. It kind of just feels flimsy. Feels like anybody can just come through, chop the rope, and then what does this girl have? Nothing. So, but this girl's like practicing, trying to take everything out, and I'm just like, I'm just waiting for somebody to just cut this thing, and then like her weapon is useless. So, pushing on, now we have this battle sequence, and so Wenwu is to eventually start to go to this gate and unlock these soul suckers, and all of a sudden the soul suckers start coming in and start like slowly but surely, like there's some people that can take the smaller soul suckers down, but then some don't quite like like some like the soul suckers are kind of strong for some other people. So we eventually have both sides that are kind of making the consensus like, dude, we should stop Wenwu from unlocking this gate because all these soul suckers are coming in, and now we're gonna have to like team up together to go against these soul suckers. And Razor Fist is like, no, we're not doing that. And then all of a sudden, this soul sucker comes in, and he almost gets freaking killed. And he's like, okay, we'll team up. So Razor Fist is to eventually cut his blade and have this new dragon blade putting on uh, to his blade, so he's good now. He has a really substantial blade on his hand now. So what ends up happening is, so Shang-Chi is to eventually try and fight his father, and eventually Shang-Chi is to end up in the water, where all of a sudden the water is to risen this thing called the Great Protector, which is this big fat dragon thing. And that is to really just be because we have this thing called the Mega Soul Sucker that is this big, huge bat looking thing that is to eventually do a number of things. One, like it is to really just kind of like be a real threat, and eventually it forces both Wenwu and Shang-Chi to work together to try and take this thing down. But then eventually the Mega Soul Sucker goes and grabs Wenwu and takes his soul, and so Wenwu, before he dies, gives all of his 10 rings to Shang-Chi to just be like, hey man, of course you're gonna get this, because you're going to have to get this, because like you're Shang-Chi, like you have nothing but a fighting skill. Now you have these rings, good for you. So so Soul Sucker just goes ahead and just takes freaking Wenwu, killing him off. And so now, like, we just have this like God of War 3 kind of moment going on in this movie, where it's just the Great Protector against the Mega Soul Sucker, and they're fighting it out consistently, and there's this continuous back and forth between these two things, but eventually, overall, the Great Protector is to take down this Mega Soul Sucker because, with the help of Katie, because Katie goes and takes her last arrow and puts it into the Mega Soul Sucker's neck, which is to basically kill this thing off. And then they end up fighting all of these Soul Suckers off to where it seems like this place is to just be protected again. And then it seems like everything is good. It seems like they have fought off evil. So all of a sudden we have Shang-Chi and Katie, who are back with this almost double date like thing, talking to her friends about what had all happened, and they can't believe a single word of it. So they're to mention that supposedly Shang-Chi's sister is to go on uh, and do her father's work, and to keep this compound up, or to supposedly like break it all down. So I'm like, is she gonna be the next villain in the next movie? Because it seems like they kind of left some things open ended to just kind of just say like, well, she might probably be the villain because they have nothing better to do in this movie, and maybe there's actually going to be some more interesting characters to be put into the following projects. So what is to happen next during this date is all of a sudden Wong is to appear and just say, hey, like, you're Shang-Chi, right? You have the 10 rings? Let's go on. So the real important end credit scene is that Wong is to try and analyze the 10 rings with his power, and all of a sudden Captain Marvel and Bruce Banner are to be kind of phased in, kind of like how Rocket Raccoon and Captain Marvel and Okoye were to be phased in Endgame talking to Black Widow. Same kind of thing here, where uh, where Captain Marvel was to mention that these don't feel like T'Chari weapon or T'Chari weapons from the first Avengers movie, like those guys, the T'Chari, the Loki villain, the Loki minions in the very first Avengers movies, and so Bruce can't really figure it out either, but he like Bruce is to also complain about how he didn't exactly get Captain Marvel's phone number anytime soon. He's whining and complaining about that. How he doesn't feel quite connected to the Avengers of more current time. So basically, Bruce Banner is to welcome Shang-Chi into the circus, which is to be the Avengers, because supposedly these 10 rings are to supposedly summon something, and summon something big. Whatever it is, we're not quite sure, but I'm assuming that it's probably going to be Fing Fang Foom, right? Like, considering Fing Fang Foom wasn't in this movie like people thought it was, maybe the Fing Fang Foom is going to be the next thing. Or maybe they're going to actually justify having Iron Fist in a Shang-Chi movie, and maybe that's the thing that is being summoned, or something else. Who knows? I don't know. Um, but yeah, so the 10 rings are to be summoning things. Shang-Chi is to basically be set up as an Avenger. And really, that's just what the movie is to really play out. So without a doubt, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.